Alright, I am back with another video, and sorry it's been a while, I was a bit busy this past week. However, I'm back with a new build for you today, the Monster Hunter, or the Gloom Knight, whatever I decide to end up calling this video by the time I get to uploading it. But yes, this is kind of an interesting build that I'm surprised I've never tried to, make before. I've wanted to kind of combine Ranger and Fighter together to kind of create, this kind of new type of, pure martial character with a little bit of spellcasting mixed in there for utility, as well as the fact that I really wanted to make a Monster Hunter character. I've done a Witcher build before, but it wasn't really so much as focusing on the actual monster hunting side of things as it was just getting as many Witcher abilities as possible. Whereas with this, I wanted to focus on making more of a Monster Hunter in the D&D sense, whereas we're actually going to be playing into being effective against aberrations, monstrosities, fae, fiends, undead, anything that comes from another plane or is just unnatural and monstrous. We're going to be good at taking down. So things like mind flayers, giants, cambions, probably mostly mind flayers, let's be honest. But we do have a lot of different monster types in the game, and this build is going to attempt to be as good as it can be against as many of these builds as possible. Builds, I should say, monsters. And honestly, it's actually a really fun and unique build, and it comes with a combination of weapons that I wasn't expecting to work as well as it did. But honestly, it was kind of fun to make and see, and when I kind of saw this combo when it comes to the equipment, you'll see when we get there, I was like, huh, how have I never noticed that before? So I think you're going to enjoy this video, especially if you just want to skip straight to the equipment part and kind of see that this combo that, I kind of... well, I wouldn't say I discovered, but definitely something interesting specifically for this Monster Slayer archetype. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. Today we're playing a drow for no particular reason other than I wanted to. You can actually play any race you like with this build, it really doesn't matter. I personally prefer one of the elven races or Githyanki. Githyanki will synergize with multiple different bits of equipment that we'll be using later, and is just generally kind of considered their aberration hunters because they hunt mind flayers, so it would make a ton of sense there. But drow also work for, the superior dark vision, the innate weapons training, and the ability to have advantage on saving throws against being charmed and you can't be put to sleep. That's just great to have in general when you're facing various different creatures who will have weird and tricky abilities. So drow, elf, half-elf, or Githyanki are my personal recommendations here, but feel free to go with whatever you like. It actually doesn't matter that much. So as such, we are playing a Celadrin drow, I should say. I wanted to kind of play just kind of a good guy drow again, not necessarily Lost-sworn. We're not hunting monsters because we're evil and we want to kill things. We're hunting monsters. She won't turn around. She won't turn back around. There we go. That was weird. We're just hunting them for the sake of being good, shall we say. But again, play any race combo you want. We're going to be kicking things off as a fighter today. Fighter at level 1 is going to give us a bunch of things, namely second wind, but also access to all weapon and armor proficiencies, as well as constitution saving throw proficiencies. I apologize, I'm trying to get this video out quite quickly. Which is going to be great, as we're going to have some very key concentration-based spells that we're going to be using in this build. So I definitely wanted to make sure we have good concentration saves, so I'm quite happy to have this here. Next up for our fighting style, you can pick at this level either 2-weapon fighting or archery. We're going to be using both with this build as we are going to be dual wielding and using a ranged weapon. So it's up to you whether you want to pick one or the other first, as we will be getting both. I went with 2-weapon fighting to start, but you can change that up if you like. Next up, for our ability scores. These are going to look a little bit strange considering we are planning to use spellcasting with this build, but hear me out. Strength is at 16, as it is going to be our main attacking stat for this build. I would actually recommend getting the Potion of Everlasting Vigor for this build to really max it out. Otherwise, you can just leave strength at around 18 by the time we're done with this build. But I do think grabbing the Potion of Everlasting Vigor is going to be a good idea overall. So that would be my personal recommendation if you do decide to play this one. Dexterity is at 14. We realistically shouldn't need it any higher, but there is actually an opportunity to bump this up to a 16 later, which I did actually do in my testing and felt pretty damn good to use. So while this is sitting at an interesting level for now, especially if you want to use medium armor, this is perfect. We will be bumping this up later. Constitution is at 16. There will be opportunities to make this higher as well, but in my testing I just kept it at 16 and it was more than good enough. Intelligence and Wisdom are both at 10. These are both of the spellcasting modifiers that we're going to be using for this build, but we're only really going to be casting utility spells, so they don't need to be massively high. You can even choose to dump one to put points into the other if you wish, but I decided to just even it out a bit. And finally, Charisma is at 8 because we don't need it for this build. For our skill proficiencies, I went with the Outlander background to gain Athletics and Survival. Because we're a drow, we automatically get Perception, which is what I would have chosen if we didn't get it, and so I've also grabbed Animal Handling and Insight for our fighter proficiencies, just to make us a good overall living out in the wilderness and monster hunting type. We're good at perceiving, we're good at survival, we're good at smashing things on the head with a hammer. Because yes, we do use a hammer with this build, so this kind of gets us a nice little kind of wilderness survivor kit to work with. So yeah. Let's move on. Right, after level 1 of Fighter, I'm going to suggest you multiclass right away into Ranger. Ranger is going to give us a ton of utility that I'm going to want to be able to pick up as soon as possible. So, at level 1 of Ranger, we're going to be able to get a few things. Namely, we're going to get to pick a favourite enemy feature. My personal one I'm going to recommend for this build is Keeper of the Veil. Keeper of the Veil is going to give us proficiency in Arcana, which is quite nice to have on this build. Again, you're going to want to be knowledgeable about magic if you're going to be dealing with various magical creatures. This is also going to give us protection from evil and good. Now, most people look at this spell and think, it's kind of meh, it's rather situational, but on this build, if you just want to slap down a reliable concentration spell that is going to do you some good in a lot of different encounters in this game, protection from evil and good is good to use. This version is going to work as long as we maintain concentration or until our next long rest. We can only use it once per long rest, but if we're able to keep up the concentration, that doesn't really matter, as well as this version is not going to take a spell slot, which is nice. This is going to allow us to protect an ally against the attacks and powers of aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiend, and undead. So all the things that we're going to be fighting, this is going to help us with. We cannot be charmed, frightened, or possessed by them. That's very specific, but it can come up a lot in Act 2. And when these creatures attack it, they have disadvantage. This is an amazing defensive spell. If we're up against any of the various monsters that we're going to be trying to hunt, protection from evil and good is going to allow us to just nullify a lot of the crap they're going to try and do to us. Being immune to charm or frighten from them is amazing, but making it so all of their attacks also have disadvantage is a very, very powerful effect. Now, yes, this obviously doesn't work if you're going up against, like, humanoids, which do make up the bulk of, let's say, Act 3. But in the situations where this spell does work, just slapping this on for basically no cost to yourself other than your concentration is really going to feel good and is going to give you that Monster Slayer vibe, like you prepared ahead of time for this encounter. Of course, we will have other powerful concentration spells for when this isn't so useful, so we'll be able to take advantage of that anyway. However, protection from evil and good is going to be our bread and butter for the kind of roleplay that we're doing with this build. Next up, we also get to choose Natural Explorer, and it's up to you what you want to pick here. Beast Tamer I found pretty fun to get like a kind of animal companion, because who doesn't love to just have a crab in the party? I mean, it's one of the best spells in the game for that alone. But see, Find Familiar is going to be great because it allows you to, you know, scout ahead with the animals to see what you're up against. You know, it kind of gets you into that Monster Hunter vibe if you like send your familiar ahead of time to scout what's ahead, and then you can plan accordingly. It feels really, really fun to use. Find Familiar just has a ton of fun utility in this game, and for roleplay reasons, it would be my personal choice. However, you could go with any of these. Urban Tracker for sleight of hand proficiency if you want to be like sneaking into people's houses, which, I mean, I guess you could do that. But there's also the ability to gain resistance to cold, fire, or poison damage. I could definitely see poison making a lot of general sense here. Again, being out in the wild, you know, you might eat something that could potentially poison you, so maybe you've built up a resistance to it over time, because you're an idiot and you just eat every berry that you see. No, not the good kind. And, you know, there's multiple different reasons. I mean, we're playing a drow. Makes sense that they would have poison resistance, at least in my opinion. So I would say probably Wasteland Wanderer poison would be good, but obviously Cold, Fire, and Beast Tamer all work. I did use Beast Tamer in my testing, and while obviously it doesn't have a lot of combat utility, just a little bit, I mean, I do think it is the most fun spell overall. Next up, we do get to choose some abilities. We're automatically going to get our Arcane proficiency, so now we get to choose one more. Stealth obviously is a good choice, but I'm going to go with Nature, because I feel like it makes sense to have Nature proficiency on this build, so we're going to go with that. Next up, at Ranger level 2, we're going to gain access to a fighting style, in which we're going to take archery, because again, we're going to be using a ranged weapon, as well as our spell casting. Now, this is going to feel like a fairly obvious choice, but we are going to be taking Hunter's Mark for those situations where protection from evil and good isn't really going to be that useful. This is going to add an additional 1d6 slashing damage to every melee attack that we make. Since we're going to be dual wielding with this build, by the time this build is finished, that's up to 3 attacks per turn, so that's an extra 3d6 each turn, which I would say is pretty damn good, so I'm quite happy to pick that up here. Your second spell can be whatever you like. I would not recommend Speak with Animals for this build, as I usually like to for roleplay reasons, because we have such a low charisma. Technically, the fact that we have animal handling proficiency and a 10 in wisdom means that we would be better at using animal handling than Speak with Animals, which feels counterintuitive, but that is actually how it works. So feel free to pick up other utility spells, like Longstrider, Enhanced Sleep. Zephyr Strike could also be really good, or Absorb Elements from the Mistress Spells mod, again available on all platforms. I would say I would probably choose Zephyr Strike, even though it's concentration based, because it is quite good, or Absorb Elements. I think those are the two most useful overall. In my testing, I did use Absorb Elements. It's really good for, like, kind of defending yourself against the various mystical elemental attacks you'll be taking from various different creatures, like elementals themselves. As this is non-concentration and used as a reaction, similar to Shield, you can just equip it, forget it, and then when it comes up, it's going to be really useful, making it so you take half damage from the elemental attack, and then your next attack can deal an additional 1d6 of that element type. Overall, I think this is just an amazing spell to have, so I would definitely have it in your kit if you have the Mistress Spell mod. If not, take some of the kind of more generic utility spells. You could take Healing Spell, Good Berry, Enhanced Sleep, or Longstrider. Something along those lines. Also, because we're a drow, we get Fairy Fire at this level, which is kind of nice to have. It can be helpful in certain situations. It is another concentration spell, though, so use it sparingly. At Ranger level 3, we get to pick our subclass. Now, from when I said the Gloom Knight at the start of this build, you may be thinking, obviously we're going with Gloom Stalker. But actually, there's a few different builds we can go with here. Gloomstalker is a great addition to this build, getting you the Dread Ambushes so you get the drop on your target immediately, giving you a bonus to initiative and an extra attack that deals additional damage. Very, very potent. We can also grab Superior Dark Vision, which we technically already have, but if you're not playing as a drow, that can also help. Being also able to hide and turning yourself invisible is really, really useful as well, hiding as a bonus action. Definitely worth it, and I do think Disguise Self does work nicely. So if you want to be this like arcane, stealthy monster slayer who gets the drop on their quarry before they're even seen, I think Gloomstalker can really, really work for this build. I think the Gloom Knight idea is very, very fun. So I would say Gloomstalker, absolutely viable for this build. However, we are making a monster hunter, so I did go with Hunter for my testing and picked up Colossus Slayer, although I would say Hordebreaker also feels especially good on this build. This is going to give us an extra 1d8 of damage on an attack once per turn. Overall, like, don't get me wrong, I like Dread Ambush's extra damage on that attack as well, and getting you an extra attack for that turn feels really nice, but this is more consistent damage over a longer period of time for longer battles. However, again, if you want to go with Gloomstalker, you absolutely could. I do not see the issue with that. Hunter or Gloomstalker works great. If you do have the Horizon Walker mod installed, which is again available to all platforms, that is another great choice. Being able to hit enemies and then teleport around the battlefield, you also get protection from evil and good here as well. So you don't have to take it from your level 1 feature, but this just gets added to your spell list if you want to cast it multiple times, so I would probably still take both. As well as you gain Planar Mark, allowing you to deal additional force damage. I use this in the Striker build to great effect. I found that to work really, really nicely. And again, Horizon Walker is all about being like an extra planar monster hunter. So if you like the kind of idea of like installing the mod and playing with this, I highly recommend it. So I would say Hunter, Gloomstalker, or Horizon Walker all work. Beastmaster is the only one I would say probably doesn't work, because we're not going to be leveling it up enough in Ranger to make Beastmaster viable, which is a shame. But since for my testing I went with Hunter, I'll kind of show what I did for that, but Gloomstalker or Horizon Walker definitely work. But I wanted to give Hunter some love, because I don't give Hunter enough love. Next up, we do get to choose another spell at this level. Again, pick a strong utility option. I like Longstrider. Like I say, we get to choose our Hunter's Prey, and we're going to go with Colossus Slayer for the extra damage. Hordebreaker is also here, which is also a nice option if you're fighting large groups of enemies, so feel free to consider that as well. At Ranger level 4, we are going to be total level 5, meaning that we're going to get Darkness from our Drow heritage. If you're playing something like a Githyanki, you're going to get Misty Step. But Darkness is going to be great, allowing us to blind and obscure kind of an area around us, meaning that we have advantage to attack against creatures as long as we can overcome that blindness ourselves, which we will have a way to do in this build. Everyone knows how powerful Darkness can be, so it's a great spell to have here, and we will be playing on it more a bit later. We also do get to choose our first feat of the build here. And I would say probably at the lower levels of the game, you're not going to be likely to dual wield non-light weapons yet. We are going to be picking up the dual wielder feat at some point later in the build when we kind of pick up our second weapon that we want to dual wield that isn't light. But I don't think we need to pick up dual wielder just yet. I think a flat stat increase will probably be better for us. I would say let's go with an ability score improvement and bump up our strength. Again, it is most likely going to be our main attacking stat if we're using non-finesse weapons, which at this point you probably will be when I kind of explain my equipment selection below, but we will upgrade to dual wielding later, so I'm happy to leave our stats like this for now. Now, I would say if you're playing with this build throughout the whole game, I would go to level 5 of Ranger for extra attack and level 2 spells, something like maybe Spike Growth or something for battlefield control, right? But when you actually fully level up this build, I would say maybe when you're a high, I would say maybe like level 9 or 10 or so, you're going to respec out of the 5th level of Ranger to make this a 4-8 split between Ranger and Fighter. Ranger 4, Fighter 8. So while I would recommend as you play this build, you use the kind of extra attack feature here from level 5 of Ranger, you're going to be respecking out of that later. So let's jump over to Fighter 2 for Action Surge, giving you another action. This is going to be very useful. Next up, at level 3, you get to choose your subclass, and really, again, you can choose any of them, but for this build, I went with Eldritch Knight. Eldritch Knight is going to give us a lot of things, namely more spell slots, including a level 2 spell slot already, which is much earlier than it would normally be for Eldritch Knight, because we've multiclassed with Ranger, so we're going to get some decent spell casting from this, and I want more spell slots to be able to fuel things like Shield, Protection from Evil and Good, Hunter's Mark, any of our kind of utility spells that we're going to be using. This is just going to allow us to use more of them. Eldritch Knight is going to feel pretty damn good with this build, but something like Battle Master can also work. We're also going to be getting, I should say, Weapon Bond, allowing us to bind one of our weapons, and it cannot be knocked out of our hand, and it automatically returned to us when thrown. Honestly, we're not really here for the throwing utility. We're not using a weapon with the thrown property, but just being able to prevent ourselves from being disarmed, at least with one of our weapons, feels pretty nice. And I feel like that's something that would make sense for a monster hunter to have. Imagine you're up against like a giant ogre or something, and they're just so strong that normally they'd be able to just knock your weapon right away from you, but here, you hold on to it no matter what, which I think is quite nice. We do get to pick up a couple of cantrips here, and it's entirely up to you what you want to grab here. Again, we don't have a high intelligence modifier, so we're not really going to get much out of the attacking cantrips, so you might just want to pick up some utility. However, again, if you have the Mistress Spells mod, Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade use your weapon modifiers for the kind of chance to hit, so these are just technically more flat damage. But if you're playing vanilla, things like Mage Hand, which has a ton of utility, and Minor Illusion, especially if you're going like the Gloom Stalker route, can be very, very fun to use. I didn't use the blade cantrips in my testing, so I'm not going to use them for this build, but if you have Mistress Spells installed, they would be a decent power increase. Moving on to our level 1 spells, of course we want Shield. Shield is going to be amazing for this build, just giving us more armor class when we need it as a reaction. It's going to be great for when we suddenly get ambushed by like a werewolf or something. I'm also going to be picking up, I don't actually think it's here, no, it's a level 2 spell, sorry, I got a bit ahead of myself there. But again, you can kind of pick up whatever you like for your next spell. I would actually probably recommend something like Magic Missile, since its damage is fixed and it never misses. It's still a really potent offensive spell if we just need to guarantee a quick last shot on an enemy. So I think Magic Missile is a good thing to have overall. We also get to choose something from the expanded spell list, and it's kind of up to you what you want to pick here. It really doesn't matter. We've got most of the utility options that we want already, so maybe something like Enhanced Leap or Featherfall could both be really useful just in general exploration stuff. I would say maybe Enhanced Leap might be a bit more useful, but it's entirely up to you. You could grab Grease if you want to make like a floor trap. You know, there's a few different things you could do here, so pick your favorite. At fighter level 4, we're going to get to choose another spell. Again, it's a pick your favourite situation. We kind of can't really use a lot of these, to be perfectly honest. Something like Catapult, I guess, could work. I don't know. But kind of pick whatever here. It really doesn't matter. We've got pretty much all of our utility options, and we will be replacing whatever spell we choose here later on. So, you know, just go with your gut. We're also going to get to pick up another feat at this point, and I would say maybe now would be the time to pick up Dual Wielder. Perhaps, but I will go with an ability score improvement here to bump up our dexterity so we get a bit more AC, and so we have a decent stats across the board. Again, if you have the Potion of Everlasting Vigor, you would also have 20 strength here, leading to quite a well-rounded stat spread for us. At level 5, we're going to be getting extra attacks, so like I say, probably about level 9 is where you want to respec. At fighter level 6, we're going to get a bonus feat, which means now we get to pick up Dual Wielder. We'll be level 10, we'll be well into Act 3 at this point, which is where we'll be getting our second weapon that we want to dual wield, but you can swap out this feat here with the feat that we just took a couple of levels ago if you wish. Dual Wielder is going to allow us to use 2 weapon fighting even if our weapons aren't light, which is great because the weapons we plan to use are not. And you gain a +1 bonus to armor class while wielding a melee weapon in each hand. Perfect. So it's a bit of a defensive buff and it fully unlocks dual wielding for us, which we need. At fighter level 7, we're going to get the War Magic feature. After you cast a cantrip, you can make a weapon attack as a bonus action. Not really going to be using this on this build, but if you use those blade cantrips, it can work out quite nicely. We also do get to pick up a level 2 spell at this build, and we're going to be grabbing Mental Barrier. Mental Barrier is another reaction-based spell. Whenever you fail an Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma saving throw, gain advantage on those saving throws and resistance to psychic damage until the start of your next turn. Mind Flayers are the biggest monster problem at the moment, so this is basically the Mind Flayers spell, basically. It's going to help us against a lot of the tricky saving throws that Protection from Evil and Good doesn't automatically make us immune to, so it's perfect for a monster hunter. We're also going to be grabbing Darkness at this point. Again, we'll have a way to overcome the blindness with this build, so having Darkness both from our racial passive and from our spell list is going to mean that we're going to have another potent concentration option. So we've got 3 great concentration options: Protection from Evil and Good, Hunter's Mark, and Darkness, all great in different scenarios, so you have a lot of options to pick from, even though we have a slightly more limited spell list. And finally, at level 12, we get to choose another expanded spell list spell here. Now, you can kind of choose whatever you like. I would say we've got a lot of great options here. Silvery Barbs, Shadow Blade, if you're going down that Gloom Stalker route, could be really fun. Force Weapon, to give your weapon a bit more oomph. But there's also generically useful spells like Mirror Image, Misty Step, Hold Person, although I don't think that fits as well on this build because we're a monster hunter, not a person hunter. But I kind of went with Misty Step in my testing because I really just liked having the extra maneuverability. So that would be my personal pick, but you have a lot of options available to you here, as you can see. You can also replace a spell at this level. I would probably replace whatever that weird early level spell you kind of took earlier was that we didn't really have it useful, and find a different usage for it. Well, let's see, we got so many good options here, so many different things to pick from. Although I do think the overall defensive utility of something like Mirror Image could be really nice. I think grabbing another level 1 spell would be good, since our level 2 spell slots are a bit more limited. We only have 3 by default. I mean, we've got a few different options here. Sleep could be useful in certain situations. There's things like Magnified Gravity for dealing with flying enemies. That could be really useful. Again, it's a kind of pick your poison situation. I don't know. Choose your favourite here. It doesn't really matter. We've got so many good options as it is. Tell you what, I kind of made a case for Grease earlier. Where's Grease? Let's take a bit of Grease, shall we? Next, I mean, I don't know why we had to replace a spell. We could have just taken Grease earlier, but yeah, semantics. Right, anyways, moving on. At this point, you have a choice. You can go with another ability score improvement, which can give you either a bump to strength if you didn't take the Potion of Everlasting Vigor, but you absolutely should have. You can go for a bump to dex, a bump to con. All of those would be really, really good. More AC or more HP and better concentration saves is always great. But you basically have enough freedom to pick any feat in the game that you think would be useful. Durable, I guess, could be useful. Not really. I don't know why I even brought it up. Charger could be fun. Alert could be really interesting if you want to get that higher level initiative. Maybe if you didn't take Gloomstalker, but you still kind of want that vibe. A Great Weapon Master exists if you decide to go down a two-handed route, which I do have an option for that, but I did kind of want to focus on dual wielding a bit more. Lucky, always great to have. Mobile could be very, very fun. Any of the Tash's feats, if played right, can do really, really nicely as well. Tough for more HP. In the end, though, because I wanted to give a bit more of a reason to use our ranged weapon, I did actually go with Sharpshooter. We'll have a lot of ways of overcoming the penalty, and that plus 10 to damage can be really, really nice when having to deal with enemies at range. So I did go with Sharpshooter, but it's entirely optional. Pick whatever you like. And that is the build. Overall, what you're getting out of this is a pretty strong martial fighter. You're mostly a Eldritch Knight, meaning that you have access to limited but useful spellcasting, as well as a lot of the benefits that come with playing a higher level fighter, a decent hit point pool, an extra feat, and just overall the monstrous attacking power that fighters get with their extra attacks and action surge. We're also getting benefits from being a ranger, getting a lot of utility there and a lot of potential build options between Hunter, Gloom, Stalker, and Horizon Walker to give each variation of this build a bit more customizability, whether you want to go the more stealthy route or you want to get more outright power. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it. Overall, we're a really solid martial fighter with a lot of great utility spells to help us out in various situations, either giving us more power or more defense, depending on what we want to go with. We're just effective in combat. That is our main thing. But again, we're a monster hunter, meaning that our main focus is hunting down monsters. What a surprise. So let's have a look at how our equipment helps us do that. As for our weapons, we've got a very interesting combination here. First up, we have Voss's Silver Sword, something you've seen on the channel before. Basically, this is a +2 longsword, one of the only ones in the game, which grants an additional 1d4 damage bonus and damage and attack roll bonus against Githyanki, aberrations, fiends, and elementals. So a lot of those monsters that we're going to be hunting, we're going to be dealing extra bonus damage against and have a higher chance to hit. We're also going to get an additional 1d4 of psychic damage on all of our attacks, and a usage of Wrathful Smite once per short rest, which I won't be using a lot as it is a concentration spell, but hey, it's there if you just need to get that extra d6 psychic damage and potentially frighten an enemy. Now obviously this makes a ton of sense for a monster hunter to have, as it specifically deals with monster type enemies, and Githyanki, which is a little weird, but I guess it does make sense given the context of this weapon. However, using dual wielding to pair this with the Hammer of the Just yields an interesting result. This itself comes with an extra 1d4 of radiant damage, which is nice enough on its own, and this weapon deals an additional 1d6 bludgeoning damage against fiends and undead. Now that passive is slightly misleading, as are most of the passive descriptions in this game, as it's not just this weapon that gets that extra damage, it's every weapon you have equipped, as long as you're fighting a fiend or an undead. So between the Hammer of the Just and Voss's Silver Sword, you're getting extra damage on attacks against most monstrosity type enemies in the game, meaning that, well, you just have a lot of extra damage to work with when you're actually hunting monsters. You got psychic damage for dealing with the things that maybe aren't necessarily demonic or undead in nature, and then you have the radiant damage for when they are. So overall, it's a kind of a potent combo, and I don't know why, but mixing a longsword and a hammer just looks kind of badass. You really feel like you're just kitted out for every possible situation, and the fact that these two passives work together so well just feels so nice. I believe the Voss's Silver Sword passive also works with the Hammer of the Just, but double check me on that. Obviously, all the wiki pages will be linked in the description below, so you can test this out for yourself. All I know is for a fact is that the Hammer of Just does work with the Silver Sword, before somebody tells me I'm wrong, and then I look like an idiot, but who knows. Anyways, for our ranged weapon, we have Gandrel's Aspiration. All attacks that we do have advantage against monstrosity type enemies. So once again, this isn't just attacks with this weapon, this is all of our attacks have advantage against monstrosity type enemies. We also have access to Sacred Munitions, which allows us to infuse our crossbow bolts with holy energy, and that makes it so for a 1 turn, our ranged weapon attacks can inflict turn undead. Now that is limited to just our ranged weapon attacks, but still, the best way to deal with undead, as most people know, is to shoot them from afar before they can bite you. The Walking Dead told us that much, so we now have a weapon that lets us do exactly that. So overall, this feels like a very potent monster-slaying combo of weapons. However, Voss's Silver Sword and the Hammer of the Just Well, the Hammer of the Just is a late game item. You can only get this in Act 3. Voss's Silver Sword you can get as early as Act 1, but you do have to kill an important NPC to do it, which, depending on the questline you're going down, you may not want to do. So this could be your Act 1 option, but it also could be your Act 3 option. So, for a potential early game option, the Monster Slayer Glaive. I mean, I had to bring it up, it's literally a weapon for monster hunters. This weapon deals an additional 1d4 damage against monstrosity type foes, and it gives you an increased jump distance. Obtainable very early on in Act 1, this will be a solid weapon to use until you get your hands on your main things. This is why you don't have to get dual wielder as early, because since you're only going to be getting this in Act 3, you don't actually need dual wielder until the later levels of the game, so you can either use Voss's Silver Sword if you got it early, or the Monster Slayer Glaive in the early game. Gantrell's Aspiration is early game as well, so even though we got Sharpshooter quite late, you could get it earlier if you want to. Right. Moving on to the headpiece, we have the Mask of Soul Perception. Gain a +2 bonus to attack rolls, initiative rolls, and perception checks. The +2 bonus to attack rolls is great because it's going to help us overcome the Sharpshooter penalty, and the +2 bonus to initiative rolls is basically going to guarantee that we're going to go first most of the time. If you're playing Gloom Stalker, you might not need this, but it's still nice to have overall. It's also going to give us a +2 to perception checks, which again, I feel like for a monster hunter, makes a lot of sense to have. It's also going to give us Detect Thoughts. The Hammer of Just did that as well, but I forgot to mention it. So we get 2 casts of Detect Thoughts, once per short rest and once per long rest, with these 2 equipment pieces. So I mean, I guess that's something, but you don't really need it. So this would be my personal recommendation for the late game, although there are a few other options out there for you, like the Helmet of Writ, for an extra bonus action when you're at half HP or less, if you want to go for like a flurry of blows in a desperate situation. However, for the early game, I can recommend the Grim Skull Helm. Attackers cannot land critical hits against you, you gain resistance to fire damage, and you gain a usage of Hunter's Mark once per long rest, so it's not going to cost a spell slot. Overall, a pretty solid early game item for us, and it's also the only heavy armor headpiece in the game. Fun fact. Moving on, we also have the Cloak of Protection. This is going to give you a +1 bonus to your armor class and saving throws. You don't necessarily need this, but it is just a nice overall buff to have. Moving on, for our armor, I've gone for the Elegant Studded Leather. This is going to give us another increase to initiative rolls. Basically, at this point, you're guaranteed to go first. It's also going to give you advantage on stealth checks, which is nice to have, as well as the ability to use Shield once per short rest without expending a spell slot. Shield is one of the most useful spells in the game. Hell, it might be the most useful. So getting access to it as many times as we can per short rest is definitely worth it. However, in the early game, and also a straight up alternative to this armor piece, if maybe you decided to go for slightly different stat allocation, is the Adamantine Splint Armor, or the Scale Mail, either works. The Splint Armor though is a little bit better, I think, because it reduces all incoming damage by 2, as opposed to the Scale Mail's 1, and whenever a melee attack hits you, the attacker is sent reeling for 3 turns. If that means that because they're reeling, they have a -3 penalty to their attack rolls, because you inflict 3 turns, and it's 1 penalty for every turn remaining. Meaning that you're less likely to get hit by subsequent attacks, which means it's kind of the same thing as Hunter Ranger's level 7 multi-attack defense feature. It's kind of similar, not quite the same, but you know, it gets the same kind of job done, meaning that you're less likely to be hit by subsequent attacks. So when some sort of hell creature is launching a flurry of claws and biting attacks at you, you're less likely to get hit by the subsequent attacks. Although it is a bit of a double-edged sword, because reeling gets removed when the attacker misses. So by making it so they have a lesser chance to hit you, they technically, if they miss you, they lose the condition, which means their next attack has a normal amount of a chance to hit you. It's weird how it works, but you get the point. Also, if you liked that buff from the Grim Skull Helm, it's here too, meaning that you can't have critical hits land on you, which is nice. So it's a bit of extra defense against high damage attacks. Moving on, for our kind of gloves here, we have the Bone Spike gloves. Now this is an interesting pick, because all this means that our attacks ignore resistance to slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage. Now, obviously, a lot of these kind of monsters that we'll be going up against will have resistance to attacks from non-magical weapons. But overall, this is actually really useful, because not only does this count for our base weapon damage, it also counts for Hunter's Mark damage, which if you'll remember correctly is weapon damage, as well as the additional damage that comes from Voss's Silver Sword's passive, and the Hammer of the Just passive as well. So any bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage that we do is going to break right through resistance, meaning that all of our extra spell damage, like I said, is also going to get that benefit. So overall, it leads to a lot of extra damage. If you go Gloom Stalker, that Dread Ambusher attack is also going to benefit from this. So overall, I think for the amount of damage that this will allow you to do in the long run, especially against certain enemies that like Steel Watchers, which are monsters in their own right, this can definitely be useful. However, another game option for you could be the Gloves of the Growling Underdog, and I think this is the first time I've recommended these on the channel. Basically, the wearer gains advantage on melee attack rolls when surrounded by 2 or more foes. So if you get surrounded by a horde of undead, all of a sudden you have advantage on all of your attacks. This is just a fun early game option that I felt like was kind of on theme for the build, but it's not 100% necessary. You can kind of use whatever you like, but this is a solid choice. However, an alternative late game option, if you feel like that overcoming resistance thing isn't that useful enough, you can grab the Legacy of the Masters, giving you a +2 bonus to attack and damage rolls with weapons. Overall, it's just a nice solid buff to have, which can be useful in certain situations. Maybe you could swap between these two sets of gloves if you're up against something that doesn't have those resistances, so you can gain the benefits of both when necessary. And finally, for your boots, we have the Disintegrating Nightwalkers. I know it's the thing I pick all the time, but it's still good. We cannot be enwebbed, entangled, ensnared, and cannot slip on grease or ice. So a lot of, again, tricksy kind of things that all these extra planar creatures could potentially do to us, they're not actually going to be able to do, so our movement is always going to be fairly free. But we're also going to get a usage of Misty Step once per short rest, and again, that is a great utility spell to have where it doesn't use our spell slots for the casting, which means we get to keep our limited spell slots for things like Shield, Absorb Elements, Mental Barrier, or even our subsequent Misty Steps and Darkness casts. So we have a lot of efficient spell casting, even though it's still quite limited. We have a lot of efficient spell casting here, which means we're going to be using a lot more spells than you would normally be able to, as either of these classes would be able to usually do. Moving on to the accessories, we have the Aberration Hunter's Amulet. A Githyanki wearing this amulet has advantage on intelligence saving throws, and aberrations also have disadvantage on attack rolls against them. So, if you're not using protection from evil and good, and you play as a Githyanki, that is extremely useful, so that gives you a reason to play as a Githyanki for this build. However, the actual passive ability, Ancient Grudges, is actually what we're here for. You touch the amulet to get to subsume a sliver of the knowledge of the Gith. You gain advantage on attack rolls against aberrations. Anyone can use this, you don't have to be a Githyanki to do so. So with that, once per short rest, we can just choose to gain advantage for 3 turns. That can help with things like Sharpshooter and such like that. Obviously, if you do choose to play a Gith, you get the passive feature, but I felt like for being like a monster hunter, this amulet felt pretty good. Obviously, it feels a bit better if you're playing a Gith, but hey, we didn't really need to. But again, this is actually a free slot, and if you wanted to maybe in the late game swap this out for the Spell Savant Amulet for an extra level 2 spell slot, I don't think that would be a bad idea either, so you can either use this or the Spell Savant. Moving on, we have the Strange Conduit Ring. We're constantly going to be concentrating on something, so we might as well get a little psychic damage whenever we do. And finally, the Eversight Ring, giving us immunity to being blinded, so we can use darkness as freely as we like. Finally, for this build, all of my armour is dyed in the vanilla dye, which is Feyral Green and Dundun. However, you may notice I've got a hood on this outfit. That comes from the Fear Tailor's Camp Clothing mod, in which we have a hood that takes up the underwear slot. If I remove the armour, I will get flagged by YouTube. But yes, so we get to equip a hood kind of over the outfit here, which feels quite nice to do. Don't pay attention to the fact that the character was bald. Hair does clip through the hood. I had to make some concessions to make this look good. And for the camp clothing as well, I did kind of look at this as a potential alternate look, again from the Fear Tailor Camp Clothing mod, just giving us some kind of extra options here, but I decided that the actual vanilla armor look was also quite good. But man, the hood, love the hood. But yes, that is the build, and overall, as I said, this is a pretty effective monster hunter. If you're up against any of the things that are kind of listed in the description of protection from evil and good, aberrations, fiends, fae, celestials, and undead, as well as elementals, like, you're going to be extremely effective against those creature types. You have extra damage against them, extra chance to hit against them. They have disadvantage against you if you keep that protection from evil and good up. You're going to feel amazing fighting those things. And there are a lot of encounters in the game that fit that bill, so when that moment comes up, it's going to feel oh so great. But you also have a ton of amazing options for dealing with other creatures too. Hunter's Mark is just going to be an effective damage boost across the board. Combining that with our Colossus Slayer feature from Hunter, that's just a massive extra amount of damage that the Bone Spike Boots is going to remove resistance against. But also Gloom Stalker and Horizon Walker do exist and can both be effective choices for this build as well. This build has a lot of freedom in how you actually do the leveling. Basically, a Ranger subclass is free choice, except for Beastmaster. Don't do it, you'll regret it, I promise you that. And then, yeah, and aside from that, you also have the Darkness Devil Sight shenanigans that I love to do in most of my Warlock builds, so that's also here too, giving you another effective option for combat. Overall, this build is just a solid martial fighter with a ton of utility-based spellcasting and can just destroy the monsters of Faerun. So yeah, really happy with this build. I like how it turned out. Love the chance to give Ranger some love. I don't do it enough. I'm really hoping that we get things like Drake Warden coming to, like, you know, consoles, like mods and such like that. And also the new classes that are coming out in patch 8. In fact, speaking on that, patch 8 is going to be a big turning point for this channel. We'll be returning to long-running build series with that, so we're going to be doing the Patron build series, which is going to be really fun, so look forward to that. Yeah, so and all the long-running kind of build series and the live streams that result from them are going to be returning with patch 8, so look forward to that. Because I know some people were just kind of like, hey, you know, these are great, but I kind of missed the series. Well, the series are coming back, so yeah, look forward to that. Anyway, I need to get this video out, so I'm going to stop rambling and just stop rambling and sign off. So, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.